Hey everybody, we're going to kick off an episode around toning, bulking up, the myths and misconceptions of this frequently asked question and topic from both our students, our coaches, and people we just talk to every single day. Fitness and exercise always seems to come back about body composition and what it means to look a certain way. So we're going to dive into this question, this topic. We're excited to do it. This is Chalk Talk presented by Platform. Let's go. All right, today we're going to be talking about one that we hear a lot, both in general PE and fitness. I get the question from friends asking me all the time, like, well, isn't, high rep, low weight meant to tone? And isn't, low rep, high weight meant for bulking up? I don't want to bulk, or I don't want to tone, or I want this, or I want that in terms of my training. And it leads to a lot of confusion around kind of like the myths of rep ranges and weights and all the sorts of things in terms of that like body composition of, it's males and females looking for different things in different parts of their training. And it all leads sort of back to understanding some of the basics of the myth around bulk versus tone versus reps and all of those things. So this one is probably one of the most prevalent questions we get.
I think it's just one of the most commonly talked about and just assumed kind of insidious lies that have become part of just fitness culture on the larger scope. Like, people that are, well educated in fitness know that it just doesn't exist. This whole myth of toning by specific types of exercise, or more specifically to the myth is if I do a bunch of very high rep at extremely low weight work, I am going to tone my body. I'm going to lengthen my muscles and make them, more kind of aesthetically pleasing. Whereas if I lift heavy, I'm going to bulk up.
Yeah. And it comes up a lot in even the way that people label things. It's like sculpt and all these different words that people will use in terms of the way that they exercise. So the first one is the lightweight and high reps, which I think we've talked about on previous podcasts in terms of almost coming up in the rise of like bodybuilding and knowing what, even those guys were doing way back when. I don't know if that's where it started and then it morphed over time, or like...
Well, so it's interesting. I can't quote me on this because I don't know that it's fact, but I did read somewhere that the origin of this myth that is just so pervasive now about toning is a product of high rep and low weight is because, bodybuilders for a long, long time have used the lightweight high rep sets in weeks prior to a contest, which is when they get, quote unquote, the most shredded, right? And the funny thing is, though, everybody takes that as, okay, well, if I don't want the bulk, I want the, kind of leanness, that's what I'm going to do. And again, bodybuilding culture has influenced so much of, general fitness understanding these days. Unfortunately, that's such a superficial understanding of what bodybuilding is, in that for the weeks and months leading up to a competition, bodybuilders also go in a massively, calorically restricted diet. They actually dehydrate themselves dramatically, intentionally, so that they remove all the water from their body. And you're actually seeing the leanness that has nothing to do with the work they're doing in the weight room.
Yeah.
And I think, what you're seeing is a toned appearance dependent on body fat and muscle development. So what we don't want to do is attribute the type of exercise in the gym in terms of rep ranges, etc., with the appearance, because there's a lot more going on there, and it's really important to know the actual science behind what tone is and how you can get there.
Yeah, and I think we talk about that a lot in just about everywhere we do, that it's not just what you do in the gym, but all of the other things that are going on with it, which is a fair point about that myth. So maybe we can almost take a step back and kind of get into the science around what we're even talking about with this word tone. Because I think we all envision something, and before I even let us do that vision, I think I'll let you actually just kind of give us a definition of what muscle tone is probably defined as.
Well, so, and not that this is important, but it is, I think, I'd be remiss not to say, muscle tone is actually like a scientific concept that has nothing to do with what people use it as. Muscle tone is like the passive contraction of muscles throughout the body. Like, it's used in a medical, like, rehab and general scientific sense And to some degree, it's relevant in that if you have a passive contraction, you're going to look a little bit harder, right? But it has nothing to do with what people think of. When we say tone in the myth sense, what people really want to say is, I want to look and be lean. And what we mean by lean is a kind of an aesthetically pleasing, according to social norms or expectations, body composition. You want to have muscles that aren't overly big, but show. You can see the definition, that you can see, what is going on there. And what that is actual muscular development through hypertrophy, so that you can see dense, strong muscles, and you are not covering them with a layer of body fat. So, and this is 80% of it, is if you want to look lean, look toned, it's going to be more about your body composition and how much body fat you're carrying. And again, that has something to do with exercise, as we've talked before. It's massively driven by diet. If you want to have muscle tone, you're going to need to operate in a calorically restricted environment and lose the body fat that you have and get to a certain level of body fat percentage that shows the muscle underneath. But you will also need, some sort of, muscular development through strength training and resistance training to develop the muscles to look the way you want them to look. And I think it's important, like, muscles do not go from soft to hard, right? You can't tone a muscle, you can't lengthen the muscle, you can't change the muscle's shape. They can either shrink or they can grow. And you can't look lean without growing muscle.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means it will just be a soft muscle. A small muscle. And that's going to make it harder and harder to look lean.
Can I stop? Because
Please.
I think that's a point that you just made that I want to make sure we have like a full understanding about, is often we hear, and you mentioned it briefly, of like lengthening and back to toning, or making your muscles lean, like those lean fibers you sometimes hear about, and all those different things. And you're almost grimacing as I say it. The point that you're more so making is that outside of rep ranges or anything else like that, if we're inducing stress or asking our muscles to do something, they're either growing or shrinking in the most like basic sense.
Yes. Now, again, there is some evidence to say that there is a difference between sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and myofibrillar, and that you can create size that's a bit denser or size that's a bit softer. That is probably not even worth discussing in this particular little touch on tone, because both of them require actual hypertrophy and muscular strength training to actually get to.
Yep.
And really funny, do you want to know which of the two kind of versions of hypertrophy and muscle gain actually occur when you're using lighter weights and higher reps? The softer one. Mm-hmm. Again, per se, there's not necessarily proof of that, but that's generally the accepted truth of which types of hypertrophy exist. So uniquely, like, if you're going to work out at all, any stress on the muscle, we've talked about this before. If you want to look at the hypertrophy podcast episode, that dives into great detail. Any mechanical work or muscular fatigue, metabolic distress, is going to incite muscular development, aka hypertrophy, to some degree. It's very hard to do a lot of it. You can't really just generate tons of muscle growth and bulk up like crazy, but you're going to create some. If you want to be lean, it's going to be more about what is on top of those muscles. So you're not going to be able to do something like 100 reps of a really lightweight partial squat and say, I'm going to get toned today.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's where we'll kind of trend more so back to talking about, in a lot of ways, understanding like those rep ranges, because I think that's where the focus always kind of comes back to. Rep ranges and targeting and all of those different types of things. So can you just kind of help clear that up at the broadest sense of like understanding those rep ranges? And again, we've spent a lot of time on it. But in this conversation about tone, is there a difference as we start to go back to my initial question of high reps, low weight, high reps, sorry, tongue twister, but like those different types of things? Or
yeah, I think first is, again, when everybody thinks of that low weight and high rep, we're looking at like, the pink dumbbell you grab and you do like, 150 reps of, and you think that we're going to tone. If it's easy, it's not going to change anything. So I think that's the first most important. Like, I think we're at times afraid of feeling like we are strength training because it's going to bulk or do something negative. You're not actually creating any sort of adaptation or response, good, bad, or otherwise, if it's easy.
Yeah.
So
and
any
I think
mechanical work is going to create some adaptation.
Right, I think, and that's a good point, is that although it might be considered low weight because you're doing high reps, often towards the end of that high reps, you're fatigued, you're tired, it's challenging you past just, like you said, almost picking up low weights relative to your strength that is basically not even breaking up.
Correct, and that's a very important distinction to make, because now what we talk about with regards to, call it maybe the extreme ends of high weight, low rep, and lower weight, higher rep, we're still talking about things that challenge your ability, so that you're fatigued at the end of a set.
Right, because if you're relatively new training and you're doing a 5x10, I'm just making up the rep range, but 5x10 of a dumbbell bench press, if you're new and you're doing it at 10 or 15 pounds, that is going to challenge you.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're like going in one direction because you're focusing in on toning or anything else like that. It's still strength training.
Right. And that's, I think, where we can look at very briefly what is the difference between, types of training intensities and reps, etc. If you are looking at high intensity, low rep work, think a heavier movement performed for just a few reps, you are going to improve your performance, life, sport, etc., strength and power, your ability to exert force slowly or with speed. And then uniquely, again, we said any work is going to create hypertrophy. If you are challenging yourself to do more than you used to be able to do, if it's hard in any way, shape, or form, it's going to create hypertrophy, muscle growth to some degree. This side of the coin, though, actually induces more of that dense hypertrophy. So what you're actually doing is increasing the number of contractile elements to the muscle. So the muscle hasn't really changed in size. You're just creating more things. Think of holding a strand, like a group of strands of licorice. You're just adding more strands into the same space so that they're able to do more work. So if we're talking toning, you actually probably want to err on the side of lifting heavier for less reps, because you're going to create that denser, stronger muscle. And if we then translate that to, okay, well, what happens when you go a bit lighter but a bit longer? Work capacity is going to improve. Strength endurance is going to improve. Actual local muscular endurance is going to improve. And the results are in, again, hypertrophy. But theoretically, it's going to be more of the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Think of the concept of the licorice strands held in your hands. You're just increasing the amount of space that those same strands are going to operate in, because there's more intracellular fluid, which helps operate the muscle for longer periods of time, etc. So the muscle cells are going to grow, but theoretically the fibers are going to stay, relatively the same, right? Those strands you're not going to increase the number of, so the muscle gets bigger. It might be a little softer. Again, that's the jury's out on that, but the idea is, pretty much standard. The idea, though, is no matter what you did in that rep range, from high to low, rep to weight, you're going to create muscle growth of some kind, and it's never just one or the other. They overlap. The muscle's going to get bigger. So you can't and shouldn't be afraid of higher weight, lower rep. One, because it, creates really useful adaptations for life, let alone sport. And it is in no way, shape, or form going to bulk you up dramatically. If anything, you might get less bulk per se than the lower weight, higher rep. Just think, what does a Olympic weightlifter look like versus maybe a bodybuilder? Olympic weightlifter, high weight, low rep. The opposite for a bodybuilder. That's going to be the difference in hypertrophy. Now, they're both built to some degree, and because they're at the elite ends of those.
I think often we use those as like the two extremes, but then we think about a lot of the different types of athletes and people that live in the middle. And again, we're talking about elite level athletes, but even when you think about certain people who are like totally cut up is the word, or like more bulky or anything else like that, a lot of it comes back to diet and body composition and things that we've talked about. But most of those athletes, and I don't want to speak too generally, are doing a mixed range of those different types of movements as
you should.
As you should. So to sort of steer back, I think one thing that I almost want to push or almost flip the script on is we're talking about a lot of times students or athletes being worried that if they do too much of something, they're going to bulk up or they're going to tone too much and they're going to lose their mass if they're worried about a sport. Sometimes people are looking for one of those things, and we haven't really talked about it, like, hey, I really want to bulk up. And we've just kind of talked about all the ways of why you wouldn't necessarily bulk up on why you're doing something. So how does that fit into this accord? Because we've almost talked away from it, and now we're going back towards, like, well, what if someone is intentionally trying to do one or the other?
Well, absolutely. So here's the unfortunate truth that I think everybody that's ever driven down this road before in a serious way is it's really hard to bulk up. And where does the bulk generally come from? Nothing to do with what you're doing in the gym. It's everything to do with what you're doing outside of the gym with nutrition, obviously sleep and other things as recovery. But it's important to note that, like, bodybuilding has driven so much of our perception of training and fitness. To achieve that look is incredibly difficult, and they spend 5 hours a day in the gym, put tons of volume of work in. They supplement, legally or illegally, far more than any normal human being would, and they have the strictest meal plans with the most crazy caloric. People are taking in 6,000 calories a day,
Right.
And it's not something that's realistic for most people. You can do it if that's your goal.
And I think, to your point, alternatively, there are other people like Michael Phelps that they used to look at and be like, he's having 5, 6, 8,000 calories a day, and he doesn't look like that because of
how much output he's putting
what
in,
he's doing and all of those different things. So maybe to even just take one step back and think a little bit more about, like, the truth behind it all is part of it, as you've talked about, is understanding, like, what it is you're looking to do, but also knowing that it's not going to happen overnight, right? Like you just mentioned, you're not all of a sudden going to be this bulked up, meaty person overnight, nor are you going to tone your muscles overnight. A lot of it is more so understanding the long-term habits that you're following.
Yeah, and look, I think really most importantly is to take a step back and determine what is your actual goal. Aesthetics is a totally fine goal. If leanness is your goal, that being said, you need to go find the scientifically backed ways in which you can achieve that lean figure or look. And it's not by grabbing something super light and doing 100 reps and not really feeling challenged. It's about adhering to a really good nutrition plan in which you're going to operate at a caloric restriction in a small way each day for a year while doing strength and resistance training to develop the body underneath. If you are somebody that is more, interested in what you are able to do, which is what I think a lot of people should be focused on, is, okay, if you're an athlete, you're a football player that says, I want to bulk up. Well, do you really want to bulk up? Mass is a fine, piece of the puzzle in terms of your goal, but wouldn't you rather be strong, fast, powerful, and gain some size? Because that's all doable. Gaining 30, 40 pounds is not, as we just talked about.
Which I think, in that very same argument that you're making for a football player, helps a lot of the people that are like, well, I don't want to bulk up. And it's like, okay, well, you can get better, more power, strength, agility, all of those different things.
You're not
and
risking
not necessarily become this gigantic.
No, it's
hard because we see visually the extremes on most ends, and like we use the offensive lineman at Alabama, or we use the gymnast that's training however many hours a day that's in the Olympics. Like, we use those extremes as our visuals, but really speaking, for most students or most athletes, especially at the high school and middle school level, they're going to be somewhere probably in between.
Well, and look, and it's very specific to you as a person, your biochemistry and your genetics. Many of you that are watching this are familiar with Jackie, who's in the office, right? She does in a lot of our videos. Me and her could follow the exact same training program for an entire year. We will look nothing alike. I will probably gain a lot more quote-unquote bulk than she would, because we are different human beings with different frames, with different biochemistries, and much different nutrition habits. Right? So I think it's important to understand that you have ultimate control over yourself and where you can go above and beyond where you're starting, but you're not going to just all of a sudden turn into a different person. You might be able to turn into somebody that can do more, be more this, be more that, and you can work towards looking a certain way, but it's not just going to be like, I lift, I look bulky. I lift, I am huge and strong. I think it's all about what you are able to do and how you kind of attack a goal over the course of a long period of time.
Awesome, and I think that's a good place to stop unless you have anything else to add. I think as we go over these smaller topics, even in this one that I heard you, as you said it multiple times, is understanding your goal and doing some of your own due diligence to understand and not just take the face value, like top line item of a
Huffington Post isn't going to do it for you.
Yeah,
right.
Like
Thrill List isn't going to give you the. And look, that's not to disparage that. Like, it's good that people are talking about fitness, but like, you need to find somebody that knows their stuff. Come to us, send us a question, read, listen, and then try those things out for yourself and understand that, you know, the 5 ways to get tone on Facebook is not necessarily accurate or a fair kind of approach to what you really want.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect point to close on, and also just understanding that, as we talked about, it's long term. It's not these short term fixes that everyone will typically try to sell you, and that we're trying to flesh through. So, as we said, if you do have other questions or things start to pop up, there's a lot of resources within Platform that you can check out that go into more detail. Coach Brez mentioned the Hypertrophy podcast. That's probably an hour long. That would help kind of suit this out, but this is a smaller snippet for you that you can get a taste of. So thanks for checking it out. And remember, at Platform, it's always in pursuit of better.